Hi, this is Heeney again. I thought I should continue my story about the experimental farm in Smithfield, so here we go. Another opportunity that we had on the farm was to actually be employed by the farm, and lots of local teenagers worked at the farm picking berries and that sort of thing. George and I weren't exemplary employees. In fact, we were fired at least once that I recall for throwing strawberries rather than picking strawberries. My sister Beverly, who's now Beverly McLean, received a lot of fame from a photograph that was taken of her at the farm. At one point, the farm was experimenting with radiating fruit to help its preservation properties. And she was photographed holding some strawberries in a basket with an engaging hat on her head, and she was very attractive. That photograph went from C to C in the Department of Agriculture publications and in some external publications as well. It was a remarkable photograph, and I can always see it in my mind's eye. If you go by the farm today, there are still a few of the buildings remaining. The house that we lived in was razed long ago. It's just a flat spot in the ground now. The house that the Wilsons lived in, where we had the maple syrup incident, was subsequently turned into an office and laboratory. And that's where my father had his office as the superintendent of the farm. I recall one night being awakened by my very excited mother, and when we went to the window and looked out, we could see across the far side of the farm the office building in flames. The fire department arrived very shortly thereafter. Dad was into his car and gone as soon as he saw this, and we hustled over in our pajamas and stood there. It was a cold day. But Mrs. Wilson was looking after everybody, and we were having tea and coffee, and the volunteer firefighters were having a wee of a time keeping this fire under control. They managed to get it out, and I still recall my dad, much to my mother's consternation, into the building, up the stairs, into his office, and we could see him in his office because the wall had burned away, going through files and pulling things out. Everything in those days, of course, was on paper. And so he was just terrified that their records from the farm and from their experimentation would be lost. It was quite a remarkable night. The building itself sustained some damage, but was repaired and again continued to serve as an office for quite some time. Another interesting experience involving my dad, and actually involving his car, revolves around a program that was instituted, I forget what year it was, but Dad had made arrangements with the Kingston Penitentiary for a group of prisoners to come and live on the farm. They lived in a trailer on the farm along with the guard, and they worked the fields. So they provided labor to the farm, and in return, the farm provided produce, vegetables, and fruit to Kingston Penitentiary. It was a good program. George and I Bill Potter got to spend a lot of time with the prisoners. We played baseball with them. We played football with them. They seemed to be around all the time. It was a wonderful relationship. Unfortunately, another prisoner from the pen came one day. He was the editor of the Prison Gazette, and he had come to do a story on the farm. And while he was there, he thought he saw his opportunity to make a getaway. So he managed to find, as I recall, I think he got a scalpel out of the processing lab, forced the guard into a storage closet, which he locked. Then he piled into my dad's car and drove away. And I recall that he was finally apprehended in Edmonton. My dad got his bulky knit sweater back, which my mother was most worried about, and the car, but his camera went missing. We never did see the camera again. So it was an interesting experience. Unfortunately, that led to the end of the exchange program with the pen, which frankly was a real shame. They were interesting people who obviously had difficulties, but they were fun to be around when you were 11 or 12 years old. It's just too bad. It just took one bad apple to spoil it all. Dad retired in 1979, I believe it was, and Sherwood Miller became the superintendent of the experimental farm. They continued to do good work up until the day that the farm shut down. The requirement for that sort of support in the area diminished, and as all good things come to an end, I guess. I recall my dad, who lived until he was 93, was living in Belleville, and occasionally I would pick Dad up and we would make the drive to Brighton, and I'd cruise by the experimental farm, just the external road, so that he could get a gander at the trees and see how things are looking. It started to look fairly tatty, I must say. It sat for quite a number of years without having anything done to it. It was just diminishing. It was subsequently sold to some individuals who are now farming it. All of the trees were removed, all the apple trees were removed, and if you drive by there today, you'll see wonderful fields of corn and soybeans. I'm sure they're doing very well. I must admit, I did stop driving Dad through that part of the territory because he just couldn't understand why those apple trees had to disappear. He was quite saddened by that. We moved from the farm into Brighton when I was in my high school years. I think I was about 15 when we moved into Brighton. I did go to ENSS, enjoyed it tremendously. Following my time at ENSS, I went to Queen's University, did a degree in engineering, and worked for DuPont. I started working for DuPont in Kingston and worked with them for 36 years until my retirement 10 years ago. The farm, for me, the experimental farm, will have a special place in my memory. It was a community, it was a family, it was a source of enormous fun and games. It was a wonderful place to grow up. I must admit, people will ask me sometimes, about my background, and I love to say, well, I grew up on a farm, because that sort of connotes hard work and chores and all of those things. It's true, I guess. I did grow up on a farm, but it was great. We had no chores. We didn't even have to shovel the driveway. That was all done by the guys with the snowblowers. But if you wanted a magical place to experience boyhood, to have a sheet of ice to play hockey on in the wintertime, to have a pond to jump in the summertime, to have woods where you could pretend you were Robin Hood, all of those things. It was just a magical place.